So welcome to this morning's coffee morning. My name is Nessa Winston from the School of Social Policy, Social Work and Social Justice, and one of the coordinators of the Sustainable Communities research team in the Earth Institute, along with Karen Foley. I'm delighted to be chairing this session, which is going to be presented by Aura Istrate from the School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy. I share quite a few interests in common with Aura, and I'm delighted to see her latest publications on livable streets and shrinking cities. However, today Aura is going to talk about how to better integrate nature in cities. Are serious games effective tools? So thanks, Aura.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Nessa. It's a pleasure to be here and to be introduced by you. And now I've shared my screen. I hope you can all see it. So today, indeed, I'm going to speak about whether serious games are effective tools to better integrate nature or nature-based solutions, ecosystem services in cities. So, but I would also like to mention that my research interest is primarily in participatory urban design and planning. And I intend to do this by making use of various tools. These include conventional tools such as interviews, questionnaires, direct observation, to more interactive GIS, and to serious games more recently. So having this in focus, I would like to mention that during my research, I've been looking at active mobility, so livable and walkable streets, as Nessa also mentioned. And more recently, I turned towards nature-based solutions in cities, which is actually, the need of the hour. So, so let me start by showing you some pictures. These are mostly from my teaching activities, and while I introduce a bit my background or about myself. So my name is Aura Istrate, and I'm originally from Romania, and my background is in urban design and planning. I've been moving around quite a lot in the last 10 years or so. I worked for a few years in planning practice in Romania and then in urban design in Shanghai, China. And it's in China where I started my PhD, initially on a part-time basis and with a Sino-British university. And then I defended it at the University of Liverpool. I moved out of China in the meantime, and so on. So after my PhD, I spent 1 year as a postdoc in the Czech Republic. Then I moved to the University of Manchester as a senior tutor, and now here I am at UCD in the School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy. And I am linked with the China Dublin International College program. This semester, particularly, I'm teaching Chinese students, lots of them, but it's enjoyable, let's say. So now let's move. I know the time is limited. So first of all, I would like to give you an overview or like a peek into some of my research concerning livable, walkable streets. So this research on livable streets in a Chinese context in Shanghai showed how residents shape urban spaces, but they are not really aware of this quality that they are bringing to the streets. So, for example, here we can see Chinese residents coming together and playing chess and all sorts of games on a super block. Yeah, so this we would usually say it is not walkable. It's a too long distance to walk. It's 500 meters block. Yeah, so from one intersection to the other. However, they have these spaces. They create their own space where they come together. They do their own activities. It's quite lively. And at the same time, we can see that the newly installed furniture on that same street, it's not really serving their needs. So this means there is a disconnect between professionals, so in this case, urban designers or even urban planners, and the residents and the way they use the streets. This is the street that I was speaking of. This is how it looks like. It's a quite long one, but it's rather narrow for its context. And this analysis also show a correlation between commercial activities, their location, and where the most dynamic street activities, human activities were recorded. Then more such instances. For example, here it's also a segment, a newly developed one in a very new area of Shanghai. So this is the street segment. It looks quite lifeless. The environment, the built environment has better conditions. The buildings are newer, higher, let's say, standard of living, but human activities have overall disappeared. However, luckily, we have these Chinese workers who again in their break come together and play some games or eat something together. However, these kind of activities are often encountered in the older parts, in the old towns of China. So in this case, Shanghai, where they play cards. Similarly, they eat on the street and so on. But they are not thinking about the street. I kept asking them, how would you improve this street if you could? And many of them said, I never thought about what is happening with this street. I'm only thinking about what I am doing, my own actions. Furthermore, these very lively spaces in the old town, which were teeming with life, were very vibrant. They showed indeed very high quality of social spaces, but the living spaces had poor quality. So in these kind of places, people preferred the government to demolish the area. And they said, we've been waiting for a long time for them to demolish the spaces and offer us a better living space, but they are not aware that the social qualities will disappear. So this was in Shanghai. Then another peek into walkable streets in a shrinking city in Czechia, which showed that even well-designed streets at human scale can experience a decrease of activity. So here, these are, as I mentioned, human scale spaces. They look inviting in terms of the built environment. However, they are just corridors for walking. People don't usually stop to spend time on these streets because they have become less attractive. The businesses are, let's say, outdated. Of course, there is also the rivalry of shopping malls, and one has been built not so far from here, so within walking distance. But more than this, these four main streets that I analyzed in Czechia, so they are something like what we would call in the British context high streets, show that where night activities, so these casinos or nightclubs were established. So one of them has experienced a decay. So less people were going there, especially during daytime, were less attractive for children, for people with disabilities, and so on. So again, it's important to have some business activities on streets to attract people and to work with them, but the type of businesses should be a suitable one. And now coming to the main topic of today, it's about how serious games, this new tool, can be used to bridge various stakeholders and professionals together with residents. Is this possible? And I'm looking at this in the context of nature, yeah, so not necessarily on streets or human activities, but on integrating nature-based solutions in urban planning. So this research has started because this integration is still limited because of the novelty of the topic or because of lack of appropriate tools. But this gamification shows some potential. Of course, there are many gaps in terms of the game's effectiveness, assessment procedures, and so on. So for this, I conducted together with a partner in Singapore at Nanyang Technological University, a review of games to see to what extent they can be used to mainstream nature-based solutions in urban planning, what are their specific purposes, and how effective they can be. There are several methods that we employed. The main one is the review of serious games, which was backed up by a scoping study and by user experience. These are some of the results. So this is the database of games. In the upper part with black, we have an analytical framework. These are general characteristics, and these are other criteria which emerged from the scoping study, from the literature, as important to assess serious games. So this is our analytical framework, and this is these are our reviews. Then some of the results indicate that indeed there are so various serious games, because this domain has been booming in the recent years, and it's even let's say more active than the film industry, or it has more players, more people interested in it. So the general characteristics of serious games indicate various times of playing, various multiplayer or single player games, adults, youth, also children, but less in our topic. Then games can charge some fees, can be played online or in person, can be digital or board games. Then they do have, so we created a hierarchy of the games, and those which we assessed as the highest, with the highest relevance. In terms of the urban planning relevance, they look into stakeholders, how to bring them together, how to encourage this co-creation in our city management, let's say, and adaptation to climate as well. And then the relevance to ecosystem services show that these games look primarily into addressing climate issues and the carbon emissions and the use of resources and so on. Other analysis that we did from emerging from the analytical criteria indicate that most of them have an educational purpose and much less are used for research. The impact is societal, the intended impact. This is what those serious games intend to address. Then the learning, it's cognitive primarily, so acquiring new knowledge, and less relational, creating relations between those players that play the respective game. In terms of the urban planning scale, the games are primarily addressing a city or regional scale on a long term. And then the capital, the built capital, it's predominant, and the nature values are the nature for society. So less nature for nature, so that of promoting biodiversity, and less nature as culture. And the practice of these high relevance games that emerge from our analysis show that there is still a lack of information. So they, whether they have conducted pre or post game interviews, whether multiple users have been tested, and whether debriefing is needed, it's still not available on most games. So the domain still needs a lot of input to make it more rigorous, more prone for research. In terms of the game experience, let me show this one first. So the participants, the players really found some of the games engaging, but overall, they did not consider they learned new things about urban planning or nature-based solutions. This could also be because our audience was a professional one primarily. And also it did not really help them identify alternative solutions for cities. So they give neutral or even below neutral answers to Likert scale questions. And one more thing that emerged from this game experience is that it would be really useful to engage with game developers who might have an environmental ethos, but might lack the appropriate knowledge. So indeed, having academics working together with game developers could improve this tool and could make it more useful for us as researchers as well. So I'm just gonna wrap up quickly. So some of the recommendations from this research on serious games show that the theoretical basis needs improvement. And by creating this analytical framework in our research, we hope to create like a first step in this direction. Then the database of serious games itself has practical benefits in terms of selecting the games based on their purpose, audience, or targeted outcomes. Then there is much scope for improvement in terms of the measurement and reporting on the impact. And we should aim for higher effectiveness by playing games which are closer to nature. So, okay, we can transmit some aspects when we play digital games on computer. However, it would be better to have them in nature to really experience the nature benefits themselves. And finally, to engage in the co-creation of games. So some conclusions: serious games have potential to mainstream a more informed integration of nature-based solutions in urban planning by helping understand our interactions with nature through educational games, by developing and testing scenarios through interventional games, and collecting new data through research. And furthermore, in terms of our urban planning discipline, which is where I'm coming from, these serious games can help diversify the approaches or the perspectives in terms of, besides having the more conventional approaches of explaining urban phenomena from top-down, let's say, objective analysis, which are quite large, are quite fast, but again, a bit far from the user. Then the second one of public participation through interviews and questionnaires, which engage multiple users, but it takes time, resources, and energy. Then it would be interesting to see whether we can have this another way of conducting research, or creating using interactive tools, for example, serious games, to identify mechanisms for co-creation in cities. So that's it from my part. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Aura. That was fascinating. Really interesting. It's given me plenty of food for thought, and I have lots of questions, but as the chair, I better hand over to some of the audience before I do that. Niall, would you like to ask a question? Go ahead, Niall.
He was clapping. He says,
oh,
okay,
I see. Sorry. Oh. Philip, have you got a question?
Sure. Hi, Aura. Hi, Nessa. Thanks for the talk. I suppose I mean, I've come across some of these games, and one of my big questions about them is, how sustainable are they? Who is? I know some of them are things like Minecraft, etc., but for a lot of them that are very targeted at, say, urban environments under climate change adaptation, etc., how sustainable are they? Do they come and go, or are they developed in EU projects, or how do they come about?
You mean how long can we use one game before it becomes outdated?
Yeah, it's that infuriating thing that the thing that you used last time doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, indeed. So there are so many that they appear like mushrooms, after rain. So this is also one of our recommendations from this game, that it would be better to put more effort into creating some better games together rather than having so many, and so let's say sometimes narrow in scope, or that could not be played with different levels of complexity. So we identified 62 games. So our database has 62 games which have some relevance to urban planning and some relevance to nature-based solutions or ecosystem services. But out of these, 32 of them we assessed as with medium or high relevance. But the others 30 are not strong enough to unite the two, disciplines, urban planning and, let's say, an environmental focus, let's say. So improving them, it would make them more sustainable. And I think this is one of the scope of our research, to really show how some of these games could be improved, or why it would be worth looking into them more deeply.
And can I ask, as a sort of add-on to that, in terms of how they're developing, and you mentioned that it would be a recommendation is that they could be closer to nature and perhaps give a more visceral experience. Are some of them VR or MR based or AR based?
Well, in our database, no. not that we identified. I think some of them are getting developed, but they are not open to the public yet. AR, VR is used a lot in urban design, architecture, and so on, but I don't know whether they started capturing these ecosystem services or nature-based solutions into them. So this would be maybe one area that could receive more games. Yeah. But also, when I was saying to play in nature, not only to use the digital means, but to really go into nature, maybe even plant some, for instance, mini forests, or even with children and so on, to really experience nature in cities. So, because this was another thing that came out, it's still unclear how much of the learning from games can be translated into reality. So for instance, if we can think of a recycling game, yeah, so most games would play well. They would place everything at the right place, right, in the game. But then in reality, maybe the recycling center is too far. They will mix up, they'll put everything in the mixed bin and so on. So they would act less, not so well as in the game itself, yeah? So somehow bringing some of the games closer to reality, so in this case, as we said, closer to nature, could lead to higher effectiveness.
Sort of hybrid, yeah, okay.
Thanks, Philip. Anybody else have any questions or comments for Aura? Just while I'm waiting, I'll just say a couple of things. First of all, Aura, I'm particularly interested in very deprived areas, and engaging young people in those areas. Often they are considered to be the problem. I'm just wondering, have you any thoughts on games as a way of engaging? You know, is there any research that shows you can use nature-based solutions combined with games? So both eco and social policies, if you like, integrated eco-social policies for young people.
Yes, well, eco-social, this part, it's less so, but yeah, there are some games, for instance, the game of floods, where they, this is an interventional game mostly, and the game takes place in, let's say, more informal settlements that are prone to flooding. So this kind of game is indeed engaging with the deprived communities, and they say on their website that up to 80% of the solutions that have been put forth through the game could find implementation in reality. But they're not saying exactly how did they assess this. But this was one of the games who gave a quantification how much of their results the ideas put together with the deprived communities could be implemented. And in terms of the youth, so young people, there are different ways that young people are engaging in games. So one is, so for educational games, many educational games are targeting students, some even children. And for instance, there is one game, maybe Laudato Si, I can't remember the name right now, but the main learning is that as long as they are not working together, they all lose. So it's not about who is winning the game for children, it's all about working together. So I thought this was a good message for children especially. And so these are learning games, but also research games. So one research which has developed a game as an app, as a data collection app, proved that students could be engaged into data collection through this game app. And it proved to be quite successful in engaging students and collecting data from the communities and from what was happening in real life.
Thank you very much, Aura. Kate, you have a question?
Yeah, just a very quick one, and I missed the very beginning, so sorry if you've already addressed it, but it's really a fascinating area of research. I'm so keen to learn more about it. And I was wondering whether, so as a former gamer myself a little bit, I was wondering whether there's been any work that's looked not at these sorts of serious games and educational games, but embedding sustainability messages into sort of more standard games, the kinds that young people would normally play. And whether there's any, if not, whether there's an opportunity there. I'm working currently on a project that's looking at how to provide behavioral insights for screenwriters and producers to try to embed sustainable lifestyles into film and TV programs, but not trying to develop TV programs in and of themselves. Actually targeting the sort of mainstream TV. And I'm wondering whether a parallel exists in this field.
Well, this is a very good question, and yeah, a nice thing to have, let's say. So yeah, so these serious games, let's say, they're not necessarily boring, let's say, or too complex. They're basically games. They still have the entertaining part, but they, yeah, address, let's say, a serious matter. So so to answer your question, we haven't looked into these commercial games. So basically all the games in our database, we had this criteria that they have to be produced by other universities, NGOs. So to be, you know, a little bit more serious on non-commercial games, really. So I can't say whether these commercial games, you know, like fighting and a lot of, they really promote any sustainability principles, but it will definitely be helpful. Just that to mention that the serious games, they are not necessarily, they can still be used for entertaining purposes, let's say, but the balance between how much learning is acquired and how entertaining it is, it's still something that it's not easy to, you know, to pinpoint, or it's not easy to handle, let's say. There is a debate about this. So that's all I can say at this moment.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Kate, for that question. Anybody else have any questions or comments before we come to a close? I might just make a final comment, and I'm quite interested in kind of natural step approaches where different organizations come together, including residents, to design their own landscape for leisure. And a very interesting one in Sweden, an example of a housing association and an environmental NGO came together with the residents to design a landscape in which the most popular thing was where they just simply raised some of the ground to form a hill, so that when it was snowing, they would have a slide in winter. Very low cost, enjoyable, simple nature-based solution, but most popular with young people who, as I say, were the problem in that community, considered to be the problem. Anyhow, thanks very much, Aura, for a fascinating presentation. Thanks to everyone for coming along, and hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you. Thank you all for your questions. And I also look forward to see how this domain of serious games develop, because yeah, indeed, there is no clear boundary between what we use, for instance, in architecture, urban design as 3D simulation tools, or yeah, and serious games. But the idea is that in serious games, we should indeed involve the residents, yeah, the community. So it's not only the professionals, such as architects or urban planners, urban designers, landscape architects, and so on, that develop a solution, but we engage a wide audience. That's the main aim of serious games. So that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Philip. Thanks, Liz. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks.